The teacup rattled against its saucer, and Lily Bennet steadied it with 2 fingers before it could spill across the tray. 6 in the morning, and the mist had not yet burned off the hedges beyond the east lawn. She had learned in her first week at the Castellano estate that the gardener took his tea black, no sugar, and that he was always awake before the rest of the house stirred, kneeling in the dirt behind the greenhouse like the soil owed him an explanation. She carried the tray across the wet grass in her dark blue uniform, the hem damp by the time she reached him. He looked up before she said a word, the way he always did, as though he heard her footsteps before she made them. "Morning," she said, setting the cup on the flat stone beside him. "You are earlier than the sun today." "The garden does not wait for anyone," he said, "not even the sun." His name, as far as she knew, was Matteo. That was all anyone in the house called him, all he had offered when he arrived 3 months earlier to take over the grounds after old Mr. Ferraro retired. He kept his hands rough with work, and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and if the other staff noticed the way his eyes tracked the perimeter of the property more than any gardener's should, none of them mentioned it. Lily had noticed. She had decided it was none of her business. "You did not have to bring this out here," he said, wrapping his hands around the cup. "You could have left it in the kitchen." "I know," she said, "but you would not have come to get it, and then you would have worked 6 hours without a break, and Mrs. Castellano would have blamed me for letting the new gardener collapse in her hydrangeas." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, gone before it fully arrived. "You worry about things that are not your responsibility," he said. "Someone has to," she said. "Everyone else in this house is too busy pretending not to see anyone who works with their hands." He studied her for a moment longer than the exchange required, his gaze steady in a way that made her aware of her own posture, the way she was standing, the distance between them. "Not everyone," he said finally. "She is right here." Lily felt heat climb her neck and busied herself straightening the tray to hide it. That was the thing about Matteo. He said very little, but what he did say landed with a weight that made her replay it later, alone in the narrow staff quarters on the 3rd floor, wondering what exactly he meant by it. Over the following weeks, the ritual repeated itself. Tea at 6, a few sentences exchanged over the hedges, sometimes nothing at all, just his presence and hers in the quiet before the house woke. The other staff treated him the way they treated all the outdoor help, with polite indifference bordering on invisibility. Lily could not explain why she was different, only that something about the stillness in him, the careful way he moved through the world like he was accounting for every possible danger in a room before he entered it, made her want to know more rather than less. "You are not like the other gardeners I have worked around," she told him one morning, watching him repair a trellis with hands that moved with surprising precision for someone who claimed to have learned the trade from his father. "No," he agreed, not looking up. "I am not." That was the moment she should have asked more questions. She did not, and later she would understand that some part of her had already decided she did not want the answer to change anything between them. There were other small details she noticed and chose not to examine too closely. The way he never sat with his back to the greenhouse door. The way his eyes moved to the gates first thing every morning, before the roses, before the tea, before anything else. The way the other gardeners who came and went from the estate never lingered near him longer than necessary, as though some instinct told them to keep their distance, even when he gave them no reason to. "You watch the gates a lot for a man who grows flowers," she said to him once, handing over his cup and settling onto the low bench near the greenhouse the way she had started doing most mornings, comfortable in a way she could not fully explain even to herself. "Old habit," he said. "From what?" she asked. "A different life," he said, and something in his tone told her not to press further, so she did not, though she filed the answer away with all the others that did not quite add up. The two of them settled into something that was not quite friendship and not quite anything else either. A quiet understanding built entirely on stolen minutes before the rest of the house woke. He asked her once why she bothered with him at all, when every other member of the staff treated the outdoor workers as though they were furniture that occasionally needed watering. "Because you always say thank you," she told him. "Because you noticed when I twisted my ankle on the garden steps last month and carried the tray for me without making it a whole conversation about it. Because you look at people like they matter, even when you are careful not to say much to them. That is rare in a house this large." He had not responded to that, only looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not name, and later, after everything changed, she would understand that this had been the moment he first considered telling her the truth and decided, for her own safety, against it. The morning everything changed began like every other morning: mist on the grass, tea steaming in her hands, Matteo kneeling in the dirt near the greenhouse, where he had planted a row of lemon trees that had no business surviving the local climate, but somehow thrived under his care. She was 3 steps from him when the sound of engines reached the front of the property, low and powerful, more than one vehicle moving up the gravel drive with a purpose that had nothing to do with deliveries or guests. Matteo went still in a way she had never seen before, not the stillness of a man at rest, but the stillness of a man listening, calculating, already 3 moves ahead of whatever was coming. He set down his tea without drinking it and rose to his feet, and something in his posture had changed entirely. The careful stoop of a gardener replaced by something straighter, sharper, a version of him she had never been shown. "Go inside, Lily," he said, and his voice had dropped into a register she did not recognize, quiet and absolute in a way that made her body obey before her mind had processed the command. But she did not go far. She stood at the edge of the kitchen entrance, half hidden by the doorframe, and watched 3 black SUVs pull to a stop on the circular drive at the front of the mansion, watched a dozen men in dark suits step out with the coordinated efficiency of soldiers rather than staff, watched them fan out along the perimeter of the property with an ease that suggested they had done this before, many times, in many places. And then she watched Matteo walk toward the front of the house, and understood, in the space of a single breath, that everything she thought she knew about him had been a costume he wore for reasons she could not yet guess. He crossed the lawn without hurrying, and one of the suited men opened the rear door of the lead SUV, and Matteo did not climb inside. He stood beside it, and the men around him straightened, and one by one they inclined their heads toward him with a deference that had nothing to do with a gardener's salary. "Mr. Castellano," one of them said, and Lily's stomach dropped through the floor. Castellano, the same name as the mansion, the same name as the family whose house she had cleaned and served for 8 months, who she had assumed, along with everyone else on staff, belonged entirely to the elderly woman who owned the property and her absent, rarely seen relatives. The front doors of the mansion opened, and Mrs. Castellano herself appeared on the top step. And instead of the confusion Lily expected, the old woman's face broke into something like relief, something like recognition long overdue. "Matteo," she said, coming down the steps despite her age, despite the cane she usually refused to be seen without. "You came home." "I told you I would," Matteo said, and his voice, still low, still controlled, carried none of the warmth she had heard in it over morning tea. This was a different man entirely, or perhaps the same man finally standing in the version of himself he had been hiding. Lily's mind raced backward through every conversation, every quiet morning, every moment she had thought she understood him even a little. The rolled sleeves, the watchfulness, the way he scanned every room before entering it. She had mistaken vigilance for a habit of caution rather than what it actually was, the instinct of a man who had spent his entire life surrounded by people who might want him dead. She should have retreated further into the kitchen. Instead, she stayed at the doorway, frozen. And that was when his eyes found her across the lawn, the same eyes that had watched her pour his tea every morning for 3 months. And something passed over his face that looked almost like an apology. The rest of the staff gathered slowly, drawn by the commotion, whispering among themselves, and Lily heard fragments. The new gardener, Mrs. Castellano's grandson, the family business, disappeared for years, came back different. She understood none of the specifics and all of the shape of it at once. Whatever the Castellano family truly was, whatever business required a dozen armed men and 3 black vehicles, Matteo was not merely part of it, he was the center of it. That was the moment everything changed, and Lily would spend the rest of that day moving through her duties on autopilot, polishing silver she did not remember picking up, unable to stop replaying the stillness in his face when their eyes met across the lawn. He found her that evening, long after the SUVs had been parked in the estate's private garage, and the suited men had dispersed to guest quarters she had not known existed until that day. She was in the small garden behind the kitchen, the one she tended in her rare free hours, and she heard his footsteps before she saw him, the same unhurried gait, though she now understood the calculation behind every step. "You lied to me," she said before he could speak, not turning around. "Every single day for 3 months." "I did not lie," he said, stopping a respectful distance behind her. "I simply did not tell you everything. There is a difference, even if it does not feel that way tonight." "It feels exactly the same from where I am standing," she said, finally turning to face him. "Who are you really? And do not tell me a gardener, because gardeners do not arrive home with an armed escort." Matteo was quiet for a long moment, weighing something behind his dark eyes, and when he spoke, his voice had lost the coldness it carried on the lawn, replaced by something rawer, more careful. "My family runs an organization that most people would call dangerous," he said. "My grandmother built it, and my father ran it after her, and when he died 2 years ago, the responsibility came to me whether I wanted it or not. I did not want it, not at first. I came here disguised as staff because I needed time to understand what had happened to my family from the inside before I stepped into the role everyone expected of me, and because I needed to know which of the people around my grandmother could still be trusted." "And now?" Lily said. "Now I know enough," he said. "Enough to come home as myself instead of a man pretending to be someone he is not." She studied him, the same face she had poured tea for every morning, the same hands that had gently repaired a trellis with more patience than she had ever seen from him at anything else, and found she could not summon the anger she thought she should feel. What she felt instead was something more complicated, betrayal tangled together with an unwillingness to fully let go of the man she had spent 3 months quietly, carefully, growing to trust. "You should be afraid of me," he said, watching her face for the reaction he clearly expected. "Everyone else in this house is, now that they know." "I am not everyone else," she said. "No," he agreed, something shifting in his expression. The same almost smile she had seen at the greenhouse weeks earlier, this time allowed to fully form. "You never were. That is precisely the problem." In the days that followed, the estate transformed around her. Men in dark suits stood at every gate. Business meetings occupied the study late into the night, voices low and serious behind closed doors. The other staff grew nervous, uncertain how to behave around a man they had ignored for months, and now understood held more power over their livelihoods than anyone else in the house. Only Lily continued as she always had, bringing him tea in the mornings, though now she brought it to the study instead of the greenhouse. And the ritual between them continued even as everything else about their circumstances had been upended. "You do not have to keep doing this," he told her one morning, watching her set the cup down on his desk with the same careful precision she always used. "I know," she said. "I want to." "Even now?" he asked, "knowing what I am?" "I have always known you were not simply what you appeared to be," she said. "I did not know the specifics. I knew there was something underneath the gardener you were pretending to be. That has not changed. Only the details have." Matteo set down the papers he had been reviewing and looked at her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller than it was. "You are either the bravest person in this house," he said, "or the most foolish. I have not yet decided which." "Maybe both," she said. "They are not always different things." That was the first time she saw him laugh, brief and startled out of him, as though the sound surprised even himself. But the ease between them did not last. Within the week, word reached the estate that a rival family, one that had watched the Castellano organization weaken during the 2 years since Matteo's father had died, intended to test the new head of the family before he had fully consolidated his position. The threat arrived first as rumor, then as a message left deliberately where it would be found, and finally as something Lily witnessed with her own eyes, when a car she did not recognize idled too long at the edge of the property, watching before finally driving away. Matteo's men doubled the security around the grounds, and Matteo himself grew quieter, more coiled. The stillness she had once mistaken for a gardener's patience now revealed as something closer to a blade kept sheathed until it was needed. Lily found herself pulled into the tension of the house, whether she wanted to be or not, aware every time she crossed the lawn that unfamiliar eyes might be watching from beyond the hedges. "You should leave the estate for a few days," Matteo told her one evening, finding her in the kitchen garden again, the place that had become their unofficial meeting point away from the men who watched everything else. "It is not safe here right now, and you are not equipped to handle what might come." "I am not going anywhere," she said. "This is my home too, even if I only clean it instead of own it." "That is exactly why you should go," he said, frustration edging into his voice for the first time since she had known him. "If they wanted to send me a message that would truly hurt, they would not come for me directly. They would come for someone I care about, someone with no protection of their own." "Then tell me who taught you that lesson," Lily said, watching the way his shoulders had gone rigid at his own words, as though he had said more than he intended. "Because that was not a guess. That was something you already learned once, the hard way." Matteo was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might simply walk away rather than answer, but instead, he sat down heavily on the low stone wall bordering the garden, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked tired rather than controlled. "My older brother ran this family before my father," he said finally, "before I was old enough to understand what any of it meant. He fell in love with a woman outside the life, someone with no connection to any of this, and he believed he could keep the two worlds separate simply by being careful. He was wrong. A rival organization discovered her existence and used her to draw him into an ambush that should never have worked on a man as capable as he was. It worked because he could not think clearly with her safety on the line. He died protecting her, and she survived only because our father arrived in time to finish what my brother could not." "I am sorry," Lily said quietly, and meant it entirely. "I do not tell people that story," he said. "I have not told anyone that story since it happened. I do not know why I am telling you now, except that every instinct I have built since that day is screaming at me to send you somewhere safe, and some other part of me refuses to let you out of my sight long enough to make that possible." Those two instincts have never disagreed with each other before you arrived in this house. Lily sat beside him on the cold stone, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and let the silence settle between them, rather than filling it with something easier to say. "Your brother tried to protect her by keeping her at a distance," she said eventually. "Maybe that was the mistake, not loving her, keeping her in the dark about what she needed to be ready for." "Perhaps," Matteo said. "Or perhaps the mistake was ever allowing himself to care about someone in a world built to punish exactly that kind of weakness." "It is not weakness," Lily said. "It is the only thing in this entire house that still feels honest to me." He looked at her then with an expression she had not seen from him before, something unguarded and almost startled, as though she had said something he had needed to hear for a very long time without knowing it. "You have a dangerous habit of saying true things at exactly the moment I am least prepared to hear them," he said. "Someone has to," she said, echoing words she had told him months earlier over morning tea, back when she had believed he was nothing more than a careful, quiet man who tended roses for a living. In the days that followed, Lily found herself drawn deeper into the workings of the estate than any maid had reason to be. She overheard fragments of meetings she was not meant to hear, caught sight of ledgers and names she recognized from newspapers she had read, without ever imagining she would encounter the people behind them in person. One afternoon, cleaning the study while Matteo met with two of his most trusted men in the adjoining room, she found a folder left open on the desk, documents detailing a shipment route through the harbor that, if it fell into the wrong hands, would hand the rival family everything they needed to dismantle Matteo's operations before he had fully secured them. She should have left it alone. Instead, she read every page, memorizing details she had no right to know, understanding even as she did it that she was crossing a line she would not be able to walk back from. When Matteo found her there minutes later, the folder closed again, but her face unable to hide what she had seen. He did not shout or accuse her the way she expected. "You read it?" he said simply. "Yes," she said, refusing to lie to him. "Why?" he asked. "Because if something happens to you," she said, "I want to understand enough to know what I am dealing with. I am not going to sit in a kitchen somewhere waiting for news that might never come. I would rather know the danger than be protected from it." Matteo studied her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes, equal parts alarm and something that looked almost like respect. "That information could get you killed if the wrong person learned you had it," he said. "Then we make sure the wrong person never learns it," she said, holding his gaze without flinching. He crossed the room and took the folder from her hands, not in anger, but with a kind of resigned acceptance, as though he had stopped expecting her to behave like anyone else in his world the moment she chose to stay in this house rather than leave it. "You are the first person outside my own men I have ever trusted with something like this," he said. "I am not certain if that makes you brave or if it makes me careless. Maybe it makes us both something we have not been before," she said. The attack came 3 nights later, in the depth of the estate's quiet hours, and Lily woke to the sound of raised voices from the grounds below her window, sharp and urgent in a way that pulled her fully alert before her mind had caught up to what was happening. She dressed quickly and moved toward the sound rather than away from it, some instinct refusing to let her hide in her room while the house she had come to think of as hers was under threat. She found the source of the commotion near the garage. 3 unfamiliar men who had come over the rear wall while the front gates held the bulk of Matteo's attention, and she understood immediately that their target was not the front of the house at all, but the side entrance nearest the study, where Matteo kept the ledgers and records his rivals wanted destroyed or stolen before he could use them to secure his position. She did not scream. She did not run for help, knowing there was no time. Instead, she slipped into the kitchen, grabbed the heavy iron skillet from its hook above the stove, and moved through the servants' passage that ran behind the study, a route she alone among the staff had learned during months of carrying tea trays back and forth, a route none of the intruders would know existed. She reached the study seconds before the men did, and found Matteo already inside, having heard the disturbance and moved to protect the one room in the house that mattered most to the future of his family. He turned sharply when she entered through the servant's door, surprise and fear flashing across his face in equal measure. "I told you to stay upstairs," he said. "There was no time to argue," she said, positioning herself near the door with the skillet raised, adrenaline steadying her hands rather than shaking them. "They are coming through here." The first man burst through the main door a moment later, and Matteo moved before Lily had time to react, fast and precise, disarming the intruder with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice she had never witnessed in the gentle work of pruning roses. The second man came through behind him, and this time Lily did not hesitate, swinging the skillet with every ounce of strength her arms possessed, catching him hard enough across the shoulder to stagger him long enough for Matteo to finish what she had started. The third man, seeing his companions down, turned and fled back through the servants' passage rather than face what waited for him in that study. And within minutes Matteo's own men had swept the grounds and confirmed the threat had been driven off entirely, the rival family's attempt to test him ending in failure before it had truly begun. When the study finally went quiet, Matteo crossed to her immediately, his hands framing her face with an urgency that stripped away every carefully controlled inch of the man she had watched command a room full of armed soldiers only hours earlier. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough in a way she had never heard from him. "So could you," she said. "I was not going to let that happen while I could still do something about it." His forehead dropped to hers, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the adrenaline of the fight slowly giving way to something quieter, more permanent. "I have spent my entire life keeping people at a careful distance so that nothing could ever be used against me," he said finally. "I do not know how to do this the safe way. I am not certain I want to learn." "Then do not," Lily said. "Do it the honest way instead." He kissed her then, in the wrecked study with papers scattered across the floor and the taste of danger still sharp in the air between them. And it was nothing like the careful, measured man she had known over months of quiet mornings and shared tea. It was certain, deliberate, an admission finally allowed into the open after weeks of being carefully, deniably contained. In the days that followed, the rival family's attempt became common knowledge across the criminal circles that mattered, and with it came the understanding that the new head of the Castellano organization was neither soft nor unprepared, a lesson that secured Matteo's position more firmly than any show of force alone could have. The threat did not vanish entirely. Dangers of that kind rarely did in the world he came from, but the immediate crisis passed, and the estate slowly settled into a new rhythm that no longer required Lily to disguise her place within it. Mrs. Castellano, who had watched the entire ordeal unfold from the periphery with the weary patience of a woman who had survived far worse in her own lifetime, said nothing directly about what had grown between her grandson and the maid who served his tea each morning, though Lily caught her watching them together at dinner with an expression that held no disapproval at all. One morning, weeks after the attack, Lily carried a tea tray across the lawn toward the greenhouse out of old habit, though Matteo no longer needed to hide there pretending to be someone he was not. She found him kneeling in the dirt anyway, tending the row of lemon trees he had planted during his months under cover, and she understood, watching him, that some part of the gardener had never been a costume at all. It had simply been the truest version of himself he had been allowed to show anyone until she arrived. "You did not have to bring this out here," he said, echoing the words he had said to her on her very first morning delivering his tea, though his voice carried none of the distance it once had. "I know," she said, kneeling beside him in the damp grass despite her uniform, despite every rule about staff behavior she had once followed without question. "But I wanted to." He looked at her, the same steady, assessing look he had given her from the very beginning, though now it held nothing guarded in it at all. "I built my entire life around trusting almost no one," he said. "I do not know how to fully let that go. I only know I do not want to keep you at the distance I keep everyone else." "Then do not," she said, the same words she had offered him in the study weeks earlier, and this time, when he reached for her hand, covered in dirt, unglamorous, entirely real, she let him take it without hesitation, choosing him with eyes fully open to everything he was and everything his world would continue to demand of them both. The lemon trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, thriving against every expectation in soil that should not have supported them, and Lily thought, not for the first time, that some things simply needed someone willing to stay and tend them carefully enough to survive. She had done that for the trees without knowing why. She had done it, in her own way, for the man kneeling beside her now, dangerous to the rest of the world and entirely undone, quietly and completely, in front of her, alone. Mrs. Castellano found them there later that morning, kneeling together in the dirt with tea going cold beside them, and rather than remark on the impropriety of it, the old woman simply smiled, the way she had not smiled since before her son died, before the weight of the family settled onto shoulders too young to carry it. "Your brother chose someone outside this life once," she said to Matteo, "and it cost him everything. I watched you spend 2 years convinced that meant the lesson was to choose no one at all." "It was the lesson," Matteo said quietly. "For a long time I believed there was no other way to read it." "And now?" his grandmother asked. "Now I think the lesson was to choose more carefully," he said, glancing at Lily with something unguarded in his face. "Not to choose nothing." Mrs. Castellano nodded once, satisfied, and left them to the garden without another word, her cane tapping softly against the stone path back toward the house. Lily watched her go, then turned back to Matteo, who was watching her instead of the retreating figure of his grandmother, his expression open in a way she suspected very few people in his life had ever been permitted to see. "Whatever comes next," he said, "the danger, the family, the world, I cannot fully step out of even if I wanted to. I need you to understand it will not always look like this morning. There will be difficult days, days I cannot explain everything, days I have to leave without telling you where or why. I did not fall for a man who promised me an easy life," Lily said. "I fell for the one who brought his own tea out to the garden every morning so an old woman would not have to worry about him skipping breakfast. That man is still in there, underneath everything else you are. I intend to stay close enough to keep reminding him he exists." Matteo reached for her hand, dirt and all, and held it like something he had no intention of letting go of again. And for the first time since his brother's death, since the weight of the family had settled onto him whether he wanted it or not, he let himself believe that perhaps his grandmother was right. Perhaps the lesson had never been to choose no one. Perhaps it had simply been waiting, patiently, for him to choose the right person, someone steady enough to stand beside him, rather than someone who needed to be shielded from every truth of who he was. If this story kept you hooked until the very last word, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more dark romance stories just like this one. Drop a comment and let me know which moment hit you the hardest, and tell me if you want to see more Italian mafia boss stories on this channel. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.